be to enable the U.S. military to put troops precisely where they were needed on the battlefield. You know, all of those are marvelous veterans that Daniel addressed tonight. The majority of them were injured, not on the front lines in combat, but getting to the front lines. And so it was hoped that teleportation would enable our military to strategically place troops precisely where they were needed on the battlefield. But the net effect of that decision, however appropriate it was during a time of World War, prevented teleportation from being introduced in the civilian sector as potentially our dominant form of transportation. And so my truth campaign around teleportation is to urge the president to declassify this technology so that we can implement it on a global basis to address the crisis of environment and development that we find ourselves in, the crisis of global warming, and launch a new Manhattan Project to establish teleports at all of the major transportation hubs around the world so that at least we'll have a fighting chance of achieving planetary sustainability.
Are you saying, though, Andy, that they've got the capability to teleport human beings like we saw in Star Trek?
No, in fact, George, the opposite was the basis of the technology. In fact, when we were small children being trained at the teleport at Curtiss-Wright in Woodridge, New Jersey, by Jack Pruitt, who was one of the team leaders of Pegasus, he would go on, of course, and become the research director of Project Montauk later. We asked, is this going to be, Star Trek was just then a new television show, 1966. Sure. We're being, I had my first teleport to Santa Fe in 66, 67, 68. We were dropped officially into the program in the fall of 69 when I was a third grader. And our first question is this going to be like on Star Trek, where you stand on a little platform and I think it's one of the other children in the program put and turned into 1,000 bees of light.
That's right.
And,
Beam me up, Scott.
Yeah. And so Jack explained, no, that the opposite is going to occur. He asked us what would happen, in fact, if teleportation was carried out like it was shown on Star Trek. And I volunteered the idea that if you disintegrated somebody, you would kill them. He said, that's right. You would stop their metabolic functioning. They would die. And they certainly might arrive somewhere, but not as a living organism. The teleportation technology that the U.S. government has been in possession of for now over 40 years, based on these schematics and mathematical formulae and an actual rendering of the device that was found in Tesla's papers, essentially works in an opposite way. It opens up a vortal tunnel or interstitial chasm, as it were, in the fabric of time-space. It essentially, when the individual teleportee jumps through that field of radiant energy, that curtain of light, of shimmering light.
Almost like Sliders, that show.
More like that, yes. The universe is actually wrapped around the teleportee, and they are repositioned. When the tunnel closes, they're repositioned elsewhere in the time-space continuum.
How do they reposition it exactly to where they want it?
I'm a lawyer and a writer, not a physicist, and in fact, I was a child on the program, in the project. I can say this, and that is, when we first began teleporting to Santa Fe as a group of children, beginning in the summer of 1970, we had a number of jumps to Santa Fe. They were just sort of acclimating us to the experience of jumping through this field of light, finding ourselves traveling at this incredible velocity through a vortal tunnel in time-space. Could you ask your question again, George?
Yeah, we were talking about how they pinpointed you to specific
I was talking about Santa Fe. What they had us do before we began those jumps in the summer of 1970 was we had to memorize the site map, the street plan of Santa Fe, because during those years they couldn't pinpoint exactly where we would reemerge in the time-space continuum. So, in fact, not just the immediate state capitol complex there in Santa Fe was the collection area, but all of Santa Fe was the area that they were sending us to. So, in fact, I was involved in these activities at a time when it was still very new and dangerous and experimental. And, in fact, they were so concerned that we would not only not arrive in Santa Fe, but that we might arrive with some displacement in time in the past or future, that they selected places like Woodridge, New Jersey, where the Lenni Lenape Indian tribe had existed for hundreds of years before it was settled by Europeans, and also an area of the country like Santa Fe, New Mexico, which had been the territorial capital of New Mexico in the Southwest for 400 years, because they were concerned that we would be lost in time, not in space like the TV show of that era, but actually displaced in time. And we actually had a seminar in which we were essentially educated what we should do if that should happen.
Did it ever happen with Project Pegasus, where they lost people by sending them off somewhere out there?
Well, during my investigation, I was informed by one source at CIA that several of the participants had literally been lost in time. There was one mishap on the project that I was a personal witness of, however, so I can certainly confirm that they weren't entirely certain what would happen when we would pop back into view. What happened was in the fall of 1970, we had a series of essentially rehearsals for that would involve having us jump into a certain location from different teleports around the country. I think this was in furtherance of the idea that they would send children to overseas locations to participate in espionage and not really be noticed as child spies. And so we were jumping through the teleport at Curtis Wright in Woodridge, and there were other children jumping through identical devices at different locations in different states in the eastern United States and in the Midwest. And I ran past a fountain, a public fountain there in the state capitol grounds. And right after I ran past that sort of monument there or fountain, there was a boy my age who was on the ground, and his feet had been entirely sheared off. And he was writhing in pain. You know, Daniel mentioned the plight of our courageous veterans. Mm-hmm. Well, these are the kinds of experiences that happen to those of us who are veterans in classified defense-related research and development activities. This boy had popped into view in the fountain there, and the fountain had been accidentally left on, so there was about 3 inches of water in the base of the fountain. And as a result, his feet arrived a split second after the rest of his body did, and he essentially slid off his ankles. And when I ran past his location, I could see that there were 2 red child's Ked sneakers sitting in the fountain, and that his feet had literally been sheared off. And he was writhing on the ground screaming, my feet, I'm only 9 years old. What am I going to do without any feet? So there were accidents in the testing of this technology. On one level, we were trainees. On another level, we were experimentees.
I was going to say, were you guinea pigs?
Well, I think that we were that, but we were also trainees because they were expecting that we would be participants in a fully fledged time-space program that would emerge when we were older, that would essentially parallel the space program that NASA was then administering. So I think we were many things. We were trainees. We were experimentees. I know that they wanted to test the cognitive and physiological effects of this new Tesla-based teleportation technology on children, because obviously one of the strategic goals of having this would be to enable the president and other executive branch officials to teleport in a time-urgent way to different locations around the world, between U.S. military bases, for example. And, of course, sometimes the president's children would go with him. And so they wanted to develop baseline information on how the experience of teleporting affected our thought processes, our ability to solve problems, and also just our basic physiological, signs. And so when we began teleporting as a group of children in the summer of 70 to Santa Fe, we would then be bused up to an old school site in Lamy, New Mexico, and we'd go through a basic physical examination and then sit down and complete several hours of standardized testing. And so they were developing data on how the teleportation was affecting kids. They were familiarizing us with the experience of teleporting. And they were clearly also still working out some of the problems with the technology, because there was this mishap that I was actually an eyewitness to involving a boy who lost his feet.
Were they planning then, as you said, you were trainees, they actually wanted you as a youngster so they could develop you later on as an adult?
Correct. They actually, one of the seminars that was held, it was actually explained to us that there would be a secret time-space exploration program that would be as fully developed as the overt space exploration program under NASA, but it would continue to be administered by DARPA with reporting requirements to the CIA. Now, those were the two principal agencies that were administering Project Pegasus. Project Pegasus fundamentally was a classified defense-related R&D program that was focused on remote sensing and time. It was hoped that it would be an intelligence-gathering program and become even more so in the future.
Andy, we're going to take this quick break. We're going to come right back with this astonishing story on Coast to Coast AM.